California's past is scarred by earthquakes that shattered cities and rewrote history. New scientific alarms reveal that the catastrophe everyone dreads may now be dangerously close. GPS and seismic sensors show silent forces beneath Los Angeles shifting faster than ever, with experts warning of a 7% chance for a devastating quake in just 30 years. If the next rupture hides beneath a crowded metropolis, will we recognize the warning signs before everything changes? The ground beneath California has never been still for long. In 1906, San Francisco woke to a roar that would echo for generations. A magnitude 7.9 earthquake ripped through the city before dawn, fracturing the landscape and igniting fires that burned for days. More than 3,000 people lost their lives. Over 80% of the city's buildings crumbled or burned. The economic shock reached across the country, but the scars ran deepest in the neighborhoods that vanished overnight. Half a century earlier, in 1857, the Fort Tejon earthquake struck with similar force along the southern San Andreas Fault. The shaking started in the pre-dawn darkness and traveled over 200 miles of ground from Parkfield to Wrightwood. The magnitude, again 7.9, was so great that rivers changed course and the earth split open, leaving a visible rupture as wide as a wagon path. Few people lived in the region then, so the loss of life was small, but the event left behind a warning written into the land itself. In 1994, disaster struck much closer to the present. The Northridge earthquake, a magnitude 6.7 event, erupted without warning beneath the San Fernando Valley. Unlike the great quakes of the past, this one came from a blind thrust fault, hidden deep below the surface with no visible trace above ground. The shaking lasted less than 20 seconds, yet it toppled freeways, flattened apartment buildings, and killed 57 people. Over 9,000 were injured and damages soared past $40 billion. Entire neighborhoods found themselves cut off as roads buckled and fires raged. More recently, in July 2019, a sequence of earthquakes rattled the Ridgecrest area in eastern California. The first, a magnitude 6.4, struck on the 4th of July. The next day, a magnitude 7.1 quake ruptured a different fault nearby. These dual ruptures, less than 36 hours apart, forced scientists to rethink how faults can interact and trigger one another. Though the region is sparsely populated, the shaking was felt from Los Angeles to Las Vegas. Roads cracked, power lines fell, and emergency crews raced to contain fires and gas leaks. Each of these earthquakes revealed something new about California's risk. The 1906 and 1857 events showed the raw power of the San Andreas. Northridge exposed the danger of faults that lie hidden beneath cities. Ridgecrest proved that multiple faults can rupture in rapid succession. Yet, despite the devastation, the most densely populated sections of Southern California have not experienced a major rupture in more than 3 centuries. The strain continues to build, largely out of sight, while new monitoring tools quietly record every tremor. What those instruments are now detecting has scientists more concerned than ever before. Networks of sensors now spread across California, tracking every subtle movement of the ground with a precision that was unthinkable a generation ago. At the Caltech Seismological Laboratory, teams monitor a web of GPS stations and borehole instruments, each feeding back real-time data on how the Earth flexes and slips. In February 2024, just after 2 a.m., a sudden cluster of tiny quakes, what scientists call a seismic swarm, flared in the depths beneath Ventura. Within minutes, automated alerts flagged the activity to researchers on duty. Egil Haukson's team at Caltech began cross-checking the swarm against GPS data, searching for signs of deeper slip. The numbers were clear. High-resolution GPS units, anchored in bedrock from the Mendocino coast to the Salton Sea, detected steady ground movement at rates measured in millimeters per year. But in several key locations, the pace had quickened. Over the last 12 months, a segment of the San Andreas known as the creeping section showed a sudden uplift of 4 centimeters, far more than background noise. At NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Mark Simons and his group processed satellite INSAR images, confirming the ground had bulged upward in a broad, shallow arc. Each colored fringe on the map represented a measurable shift, captured from hundreds of miles overhead. The swarm beneath Ventura was not an isolated event. In the weeks that followed, similar clusters appeared near San Ramon in the Central Valley, mapped by seismic arrays and cataloged in real time. These were not typical aftershocks, but bursts of microquakes, often accompanied by subtle pressure spikes in borehole sensors. Some scientists suspected fluid movement along hidden faults. Others pointed to stress transfer between deep crustal blocks. By late February, Caltech's internal alert system had triggered a chain of red flag messages. Emails and Slack threads debated the meaning of the data late into the night. At 2:23 a.m. on February 28, the lab's automated system sent a priority notice to the USGS. Side-by-side displays of GPS velocity, INSAR displacement, and swarm locations appeared on monitors, each dataset carrying the stamp of its institution, Caltech, Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and USGS. The evidence was stacking up. Ground that had been stable for decades was now shifting, not just in one place, but across multiple segments and fault systems. The patterns raised urgent questions about whether the strain was being released in small doses or stored for something larger. For scientists, these readings are not just numbers. They are signals that the Earth's machinery is changing beneath California's cities and valleys. The technology, decades in the making, has made it possible to see what was once invisible. The slow, relentless buildup of stress that could, at any moment, break free. With each new alert, the need to understand what lies buried beneath becomes more pressing. The sensors have spoken. Now, the search turns to the faults themselves, hidden deep below the surface. Beneath the busy streets and glass towers of Los Angeles lies a fault system most residents have never heard of, yet it poses one of the city's gravest threats. The Puente Hills Blind Thrust is a hidden fracture, stretching more than 40 kilometers from downtown Los Angeles east toward Brea. Unlike faults that scar the landscape, this one is buried deep, and its three main ramps, the Los Angeles segment, the Santa Fe Springs segment, and the Coyote Hills segment, all dip northward. They are stacked in layers starting about 8 kilometers below the surface. These ramps are separated by just a few hundred meters at depth, making it possible for them to link up during a powerful rupture. What makes the Puente Hills system so dangerous is its invisibility. There is no surface crack or obvious warning. Instead, the fault slowly folds and deforms the rock above, a process revealed only by seismic imaging, petroleum well data, and clusters of small earthquakes. Scientists have measured slip rates for the segments. The Los Angeles ramp moves at less than a millimeter per year, while Coyote Hills creeps a little faster, just over 1 millimeter annually. These numbers sound small, but over centuries, strain accumulates directly beneath millions of people. The last time this fault made itself known was in 1987, when the Whittier Narrows earthquake struck. That event, a magnitude 6.0, killed 8 people and damaged thousands of buildings, even though it ruptured only a small section of the system. Paleoseismic studies and fold dating suggest that the Puente Hills is capable of far more. If all 3 segments ruptured together, models show it could unleash a magnitude 7.1 to 7.5 earthquake. Because the fault sits directly under the heart of Los Angeles, the shaking would be amplified by the basin's soft sediments. Scenario maps from the USGS and the Southern California Earthquake Center predict that ground motions in a Puente Hills event would rival or even exceed those from a distant San Andreas quake, simply because the energy would be released beneath the city's densest neighborhoods, hospitals, and transit lines. Unlike the San Andreas, the recurrence intervals for Puente Hills are harder to pin down. The absence of surface rupture means scientists rely on indirect clues, folds in ancient rock, buried layers shifted out of place, and the pattern of small quakes. Estimates suggest that large events happen every several hundred to more than 1,000 years. Yet the fault's geometry and ability to link segments mean that the next rupture could be much larger than anything in the recorded past. The threat is not just theoretical. Loss models show that a full-scale Puente Hills earthquake could cause damage and casualties on par with the worst disasters in California history. For Los Angeles, the danger is not just beneath the surface, it is woven into the very ground on which the city stands. Deep beneath Los Angeles, the mechanics of a future earthquake are being measured not just by how much the ground moves, but by how fast the rupture could travel once it begins. In recent years, scientists have focused on a phenomenon called supershear, an earthquake rupture that races down a fault faster than the shear waves it creates. Unlike typical quakes, where the rupture front lags behind the seismic energy, a supershear event breaks ahead, delivering a concentrated pulse of shaking that can devastate everything in its path. Studies show that about 1 in 3 major strike-slip earthquakes worldwide have reached supershear speeds. California's long straight faults, especially the San Andreas, fit the profile for this kind of rupture. Laboratory models and computer simulations help explain the danger. When a rupture transitions to supershear, the energy is no longer dispersed evenly. Instead, shock waves build up at the front, much like a sonic boom. This can double the intensity of shaking along the fault's length, sending destructive waves farther and faster than standard hazard maps predict. The 2002 Denali earthquake in Alaska and the 2018 Palu earthquake in Indonesia both produced supershear ruptures, causing unexpected patterns of destruction. For California, the concern is not just theoretical. Seismologists at USGS and the Southern California Earthquake Center have recalculated risk models to account for the possibility that the next major fault break could go supershear beneath a densely populated region. Probability models now frame the risk in stark terms. According to the latest Uniform California earthquake rupture forecast, there is about a 7% chance that the Puente Hills blind thrust or a similar concealed fault under Los Angeles will generate a magnitude 6.7 or greater earthquake in the next 30 years. That figure may sound small, but it represents the same odds as a house fire over a typical mortgage. The number comes from decades of data, slip rates measured in millimeters per year, paleoseismic records of ancient quakes, and the geometry of faults now mapped in detail from seismic imaging. The logic tree built into the USGS forecast weighs all these factors, from recurrence intervals to the possibility of multi-segment ruptures. The urgency is not just in the probability, but in how a supershear rupture would play out in an urban environment. Buildings and bridges are typically engineered for the strongest shaking perpendicular to the fault, but supershear events focus energy along the fault line itself, amplifying shaking over longer distances. For Los Angeles, this means that a rupture on the Puente Hills blind thrust or a nearby fault could send waves of destruction through the city's core in seconds, catching millions off guard. The science has turned mechanics into a metric of urgency and risk, and the numbers are now impossible to ignore. California's water supply depends on a web of aqueducts, tunnels, and levees that stretch from the far north to the southern deserts. Each of these lifelines crosses active faults, most notably the San Andreas. The State Water Project and the Central Valley Project both snake across this fault line, channeling water from the Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta to cities and farms hundreds of miles away. At every crossing, engineers face a challenge: how to build structures that can survive the ground shifting by several meters in a single violent moment. Current designs, many decades old, were never meant to withstand the full force of a magnitude 7.8 rupture. The Sacramento-San Joaquin Delta, a patchwork of islands and channels protected by more than 1,100 miles of earthen levees, stands as one of the most fragile points in the entire system. These levees rest on soft, waterlogged soils, prone to liquefaction during strong shaking. A single major earthquake could cause dozens of levees to fail at once. When that happens, salt water from the San Francisco Bay would surge inland, contaminating drinking water for nearly 27 million people and threatening 750,000 acres of farmland. Even the most optimistic repair estimates predict months before these levees could be rebuilt and freshwater supply restored. Farther south, the Colorado River Aqueduct carries water through the Whitewater Tunnel, a critical link for the Metropolitan Water District. Seismic risk assessments name this tunnel as one of the most likely points of catastrophic failure in a regional quake. If it collapses, the loss of imported water to Southern California would be immediate and severe. Official scenario models, including those led by Dr. Lucy Jones, warn that a major San Andreas rupture could sever every aqueduct supplying Southern California at once. Restoration of external water supply could take at least 6 months, possibly longer if multiple systems are hit. Emergency plans call for temporary pipelines, water trucks, and rationing, but these measures only scratch the surface of what is needed for a region of 20 million people. Hospitals, fire departments, and entire industries would be forced to operate with little or no water, while public health and sanitation face mounting threats. The fragility of California's water lifelines turns a seismic event into a crisis that ripples through every corner of the state. In a farming town near the edge of the Central Valley, a family gathered around their kitchen table, sorting through paperwork that had arrived after a local earthquake safety meeting. Their home sits atop a newly mapped blind thrust fault, one that did not even appear on hazard maps a year before. When they applied for earthquake insurance and submitted receipts for a seismic retrofit, the claim was denied. The insurer required engineering certification that was not available in their county, and the policy excluded coverage for retrofits not completed to the latest code. For this family, and thousands like them, the promise of protection turned out to be little more than fine print. Across the region, stories like theirs are becoming more common. In 2024, the Earthquake Brace Plus Bolt program received more than 20,000 applications for retrofit microgrants, but could only fund about 6,500, leaving 2 out of 3 families without help. In the Central Valley, the odds are worse. Lower income and rural households face steep barriers to qualifying, from the cost of engineering reports to the digital divide that makes even applying a challenge. Meanwhile, the state's own data shows a funding gap that will exceed $1.2 billion over the next decade, with demand in places like Tulare and Kern counties outpacing available grants by as much as 4 to 1. While families struggle for support, powerful interests shape the rules. Real estate developer associations and building industry lobbyists have fought to delay or water down seismic safety mandates, arguing that mandatory upgrades are too expensive and would drive up housing costs. In legislative hearings, representatives warned that stricter retrofit laws would force developers out of the market or pass costs to renters. As a result, exemptions and delays have left thousands of older homes and apartment buildings, especially in working-class and rural areas, without the upgrades scientists say are urgently needed. Local emergency managers see the consequences firsthand. After the latest USGS hazard maps were released, calls for help surged, but resources did not. One Ella County emergency manager put it simply: when the next big quake hits, the gap between who is ready and who is left behind will be measured in lives, not dollars. The decisions made now about funding, policy, and who receives support will determine not just who recovers, but who survives. Right now, millions of Californians live above fault lines that scientists say are more unpredictable than ever. With a 7% chance of a major quake on the Puente Hills Fault in the next 30 years, the next moment could reshape everything. Preparedness isn't just policy, it's survival. The ground beneath us never sleeps. Stay alert, stay ready, and share your thoughts below.